As some of you know, I got to try this at Gen Con, but now I bought it. It's mine. My own. My precious! So it begins. Bum, ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum. Ba-na-nan, 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 bum, 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 ba-da-bum. Whoa! I'm going on an adventure! If you're wondering whether this is the best Lord of the Rings game, yes it is. If you don't keep your feet, there's no telling where you'll be swept off to. From the narrative-fitting cooperation to the strategic implementation of the theme, never have I ever felt more in Middle-earth than playing this. However, everyone and their dog Pluto is talking about this game, so I'm going to try and keep the rules brief. This means I'm mostly going to reference how it's different from Pandemic. If you've never played Pandemic, not all those who wander are lost. First of all, the characters are a little more complex. They usually have 3 or more abilities, instead of just 1 or 2. Then you'll receive another character, and on your turn you can take 4 actions with one and 1 action with the other, or vice versa. This really increases your options. Then after your turn, the threat deck won't pop out diseases. Instead, it both moves armies and enacts the hunt for the ring, depending on whether there's a banner at the top or a banner at the bottom. If it's at the top, then you'll move these armies according to these ley lines, which may cause battles when running into friendly troops, which means you get to roll dice down the Doom Tower to see who survives. If there's ever a haven with only bad guys, then it becomes a shadow stronghold, and you will lose 3 hope. If you ever reach despair, then you lose the game. Woo. Now if the banner's on the bottom, then you'll add a dude to the map, and then the Iron Nazgul will move towards Frodo. Why do we care about Frodo? If you don't know the answer to that, why are you watching this video? But in game terms, because the last and only constant objective in the game is to traverse Middle-earth, sneak into Mount Doom, because one does not simply walk into Mordor, and dunk in the ring. The reason this is such a pain is because every time Frodo moves, you have to roll a search die for every bad guy in his space and any Nazgul in his region, of course using everyone's favorite Barad-dûr. If you roll a tree, then you lose 1 hope for each. Again, remembering if you reach despair, that you lose. Woo. But don't worry, it's not all about Frodo. There are at least 3 other objectives that you can get to work on, which usually has positive benefits, like desperately gaining hope. You can also go on the offensive, which will pull the eye away from Frodo, and even conquer strongholds, which gains you 2 hope. So there is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. And I think that's all we're going to cover about rules. There are some other minor differences, like you can turn cards into tokens, and then you can march around with friendlies in your space, or whatever other details I didn't go over. Well, that's just maggoty bread. So let's put meat back on the menu. Right away, I just like the variability that comes in this box. There's 13 different characters, which all play pretty differently, but also you always get 2 of them, so there's unique combos you can try out. There's also 23 differing objectives besides Frodo's, which changes the game pretty dramatically. It has you playing through different parts of the story and caring about different places on the map every time. And I just really appreciate that. Also, I like how the threat deck being reshuffled naturally foreshadows future problems, either shoving about orcs or by the Nazgul hunting Frodo, depending on whether it's the top or the bottom. But I also like how this has a little bit of unpredictability. You can have an idea of what will cause trouble, but even the very wise cannot see all ends. I also like how a lot of the resources have multiple ways you can spend them. For instance, you can spend rings to re-roll dice, but those are also the thing that Frodo needs to win the game. Do you spend them now and hope you can get more later? There's actual decision there, and it's juicy. And lastly, I like how much richer of an experience this is without being overly complicated or long. I'm looking at you, War of the Ring. It's pretty easy to learn if you already know Pandemic. Alright, let's get to some things that I'm okay with, but you might not like. I've seen some other reviewers complain that someone always has to be Frodo and that his role is repetitive and maybe boring. I personally don't see it that way at all. In fact, I think the opposite. And I really enjoy the puzzle of how/where to move him about and who he's going to team up with. I guess that perhaps the very final infiltration into Mount Doom does feel very samey, but I think it provides a great climactic ending which other cooperative games lack. However, I do think this game is a little swingy. Because you can potentially lose a lot of hope at once due to a bad flop or some bad rolls, it can feel like you're dealt a bit of bad RNG. I don't mind this in particular because I think it adds to the challenge, and there are enough ways to mitigate rolls or even gain hope that it makes me okay with it. There's also the complaint that in Pandemic you're waiting around to draw the right cards. And yes, this sometimes still happens in this game. However, I find that it annoys me the least in this implementation, because everyone has 2 characters, and usually I can afford one of them to go on a card trading side quest. There's also the issue that sometimes you'll find that you don't really have anything meaningful to do with the character. However, several times this seemingly meaningless decision might result in saving the game. So it happens, but I personally was pleasantly surprised by it multiple times. Also, it's a pretty pricey game, and while it could have been a lot cheaper and smaller without a giant dice tower, I have no regrets. This has been my favorite implementation of any dice tower in any game. Not only does it fit fantastically into the box, but its destruction upon victory is extremely satisfying, so even though it hurts my wallet, I have to give it a pass. Now let's get to the one thing that I think most people have a hard time with. The board! The board is just way too busy! Puzzling out where all the little orcs need to go is one thing, and it doesn't look very pretty, but it works. But as soon as you throw a bunch of Nazgul in your space, you can kiss that readability goodbye. Now, it's not a huge negative because I don't know how else you'd do the enemy movements. And I could just, scoot the Nazgul out of the way. It's just kind of overwhelming and tedious. Now, all of that probably sounds like this is a pretty great game. And it is, I can assure you. However, none of that is the reason why I'm making this video. The real reason why I'm making it can be summed up with one word. Theme. Yes, this game does have cool little references. Like if you look close on the map, you can see all kinds of little details that are actually pretty fun. And if you get the help of the Ents, then conquering Isengard becomes a lot easier. Or if you get the aid of the Eagles, you can teleport somewhere on the map, with some extra special consequences for Frodo, which makes me laugh. Also, the character abilities are fairly spot on. Merry and Pippin are great distractions for Nazgul. Galadriel can see into the future, and Eowyn can remove Nazgul from the game, which is just so good. And of course, there's plenty theme in Frodo's objective, but also there's more to be had in the other 23 objectives. You might free Theoden's mind, or confront the Balrog. Or if you challenge Sauron, then all of the orcs in Mordor will mass in one spot, leaving Frodo a much easier route to get to Mount Doom, which is exactly what happened in the movie. However, all of these things you can figure out by opening the box and reading the components. Let me give you a poignant example from a recent game of mine, where the theme was so strong that I literally learned how to play the game better by thinking about the theme, which I don't think has ever happened to me in another board game. Okay, it's confession time. I accidentally let the Shire burn, and we lost. But don't worry, after some personal reflection, I realized my folly. When trying to protect the Havens, I was being too offensive with my troops. I realized this because the only time in the movies they went on the offensive to defend themselves, it was because this guy was trying to sacrifice his son. Ew. This makes sense when you actually look at how combat works. The game favors much more neutral to positive results when soldiers are defending within havens. But I didn't figure that out until I thought about the theme. And all of that strategic implication and narrative is basically summed up in this one die face. I bet you can easily imagine what story this die face holds. Or how about when we can't spare enough time to defend every little town, and we just have to hope that the free people of the Middle-earth can roll well enough to defend themselves. Which is just like, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. Let alone how a bad search roll from Frodo can easily feel like a mongrel blade to the shoulder. Or how the threat deck effortlessly generates little fast goblin raids, or a slow-moving orc army, which Matthew Lees from Shut Up and Sit Down did a deep dive into that one mechanic. So now I don't have to. Thanks, Matt. However, not everything can be said to be on theme, and some things might even pull you out. For instance, if Frodo is ready at Mount Doom to toss in the ring and save Middle-earth, he can't because he has to finish all those other objectives first? The quest stands on the edge of a knife, and Frodo has to wait for Legolas to ping one more orc so he can win his bet with Gimli? What? Speaking of which, a few of those objectives might have happened off screen, but I don't really care as much about bringing light to Mirkwood. And if you want to pass your buddy a card so, you can win the game, Matt Leacock will jump out of the rules and shout, "You shall not pass!" Because pandemic, essentially. The region doesn't match, fool. Or if I gain a resource with one character, my other character that's across the universe can use it in the same turn. However, let me tell you a little secret. Come here. When I'm not doing something on brand for Lord of the Rings, it just doesn't even matter to me. And I'll tell you why. Yes, the thematic moments outweigh the lacking ones. And yes, there does need to be some level of abstraction for it to be a board game. But to explain the real reason why it doesn't bug me at all, I'm going to have to add one more word to my review, and that's tone. There's no secret that this system is based on Pandemic, and I could make some arguments about how the bones of Pandemic being cooperative much more mirrors the cooperative tale of the main characters, or that the Horde of Evil being operated by a deck of unfeeling cards more closely mirrors Sauron, which should feel more like a force of nature, rather than just your buddy sitting across from you. But I'm not going to do that. Well, I just did that, but pretend I didn't. We're going to go even further into feelings. Ugh. If I were to describe how Pandemic makes me feel, it would be trying to deal with too many problems at once, barely holding on, a desperate struggle with overwhelming odds. And guess what? That's exactly the feelings that a Lord of the Rings game should have. One of the biggest lessons I feel Tolkien was trying to demonstrate is that even through desperation, when darkness is surrounding you and you can't see a way forward, there is always hope. And that as long as you keep moving forward, even darkness must pass. So yes, this game is full of thematic moments that come from the story. But even when those moments lack, such as an army marching back and forth for a few turns, or for some reason the objective has me subduing Umbar, the real reason why it still works is because at the end of the day, the tone is still correct. Or in other words, when something I'm doing doesn't feel exactly like Lord of the Rings, that's okay because it still feels like Pandemic. And it turns out that feelings that Pandemic generates in me are the feelings that I want to have in a game of the Lord of the Rings. And that's the real reason that this is my favorite Lord of the Rings game, is because the tone fits the theme. I don't know if you can tell, but this story, this world, has come to mean a lot for me over the years. So I'd like to wrap up this review by thanking Matt Leacock and Z-Man Games for making this implementation of Lord of the Rings. It really is the one to rule them all. And that's it for my review, but before I go, I'd like to let you know that I'm launching a Discord. Woo! One of my favorite parts of becoming a reviewer is being more involved in the board game community at large. So I thought I might as well start my own. Come say hi, talk about games, and maybe bug me about that Blighted Reach video. Anyway, I'm glad that you were all with me here at the end of all things. So thanks for watching. And whoa! Fly, you fools!